Okay. I thought this day might never come, but I did it. I finished The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I started reading this in fucking April. I had to check. I checked my Goodreads, and yeah, it took me that long. With that said, I read a lot of stuff in between, chapters, and it's a long book. It's 1,300 pages. It takes a while, and I'm not someone who does audiobooks usually, so it took me a hot minute to finish this thing. But I will say, it was worth it. I really liked it. For anyone who doesn't know, The Way of Kings is book one in the Stormlight Archive, which is a series by author Brandon Sanderson. It is a epic high fantasy tale with several different narratives happening at once that all kind of interweave. So if you're into that sort of thing, might be worth checking out. I'm not someone who has historically been like a big fantasy reader. Fantasy has sort of re-entered my life in the past couple years, mostly because my girlfriend really likes fantasy books, and she's gotten me into it. So thank you, Kate. I read a lot of fantasy when I was a kid. I'm glad I got back into it, though, because these books are kind of a task at times, but the scope and the sort of like ambition of a lot of these stories is really cool. So even if you're not a fantasy writer, I know a lot of people who watch my channel are here for like Haruki Murakami and the other kind of weird like Japanese stuff that I read. But I would encourage you to kind of step outside of your comfort zone and try something like this. Not even necessarily just The Way of Kings, but really anything that's like this thick and has this many characters. For a little context, Brandon Sanderson is someone who's been around for probably almost 25 years at this point. This isn't his only series that he's written. This is certainly his most ambitious. He wrote another series called Mistborn that I read last year, which is fantasy in its own way, but kind of set in a completely different world than this one. I really liked Mistborn. It wasn't my favorite thing in the world, but I could see, or at least start to see, why people are so kind of rabid about their fandom with Brandon Sanderson. Me finishing this book is coming on the heels of the fifth book in this series called Wind and Truth, which just came out like a couple days ago, basically. Wind and Truth is allegedly, it's going to be quite a while until I get to that one. It allegedly sort of caps off like the first 5 books in what is supposed to be a 10-book series with the Stormlight Archive. The other thing about Brandon Sanderson is that not only does he have multiple book series, but a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are sort of contained in an overarching like universe that kind of connects all of these different series called the Cosmere. Before I started reading him, like that was kind of intimidating, to be honest. The fact that like this is a 1,300 page book, the other 4 books in the series are just as long, and then you have Mistborn, and then you have like the standalone novels. It's kind of a lot to take in if you haven't like gotten into it already. But with that said, I saw like how passionate people were about this book and his other books, and I thought, well, there must be a reason, right? I don't know if I'll ever read everything inside of the Cosmere, but I at least want to try it out. And yeah, truth be told, it's good. It's not my favorite thing in the world, and we'll get into it in a bit. I want to sort of lay out some non-spoilery things for a minute first, and then I'll get into kind of more of the particulars and how much I liked or disliked it. But if you're someone who likes fantasy, probably you've already read this. As far as like modern fantasy goes, as far as I can tell, this is within the sort of like grand canon of all things fantasy. At least in like the digital age where people are talking about it on TikTok and YouTube and all this stuff. And if you're someone who's not into fantasy, try something new. So I will say at the outset, I did like this and you should get into it if you trust my opinion on books. It's hard to talk about the particulars of this book without spoiling anything. So I will try my best to give a little bit of context for what this book is about. And I'll sort of leave it there. So I'll put some timestamps down below. If you really don't want anything spoiled for you, maybe stop here. Just know that I liked it and come back to it when you're done. But I will give a brief overview about kind of the vibe and what it's about, and then I'll put a timestamp for when I like get fully into spoilers and everything. I feel like it's kind of necessary because there's so much going on in this book, and I just have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot to talk about with this thing, so keep that in mind. God, it's hot in here. All right, so The Way of Kings, how best I describe it. There are essentially three main point of view characters in the book. You have a character named Kaladin, who at his core is like this soldier character who has gotten himself to a point in his life that he did not necessarily anticipate. If you look at where he was as a kid and to where he was now. Kaladin gets like the majority of the POV chapters, I think. I haven't counted them, but he sort of feels like main character 1A. Our second main character is Shallan, who is a woman who's in a bit of a predicament, and she's sort of on a journey to like redeem her family's name and to sort of get them out of this like poverty or about to be poverty stricken situation that they are in. And then the third POV character you have is this guy named Dalinar, who is sort of a member of the societal elite, and he's kind of going through it. He's having visions, and he doesn't know where they're coming from. The people around him think he's maybe going crazy, but he has other ideas about it. Outside of those three main characters, this is a fantasy world. There's swords and creatures and magic and all that kind of fun stuff. I think one of the more interesting things about this world, though, is like the aesthetic of it. I'm someone who has kind of a hard time picturing things in my head when I'm reading a book. I could tell you what it's supposed to look like, but I don't necessarily see it in my head that clearly. However, even with my sort of like limited capabilities to actually picture what he is describing, it's a pretty unique aesthetic choice for a fantasy world. This is going to sound super fucking goofy, but like everything is very like crustacean themed. Like everything from like the creatures to the armor that people wear to the weapons, like it's all kind of like shells, if that makes sense. It also is kind of a very colorful world too. So if you're looking for something that like aesthetically isn't like completely a ripoff of like Lord of the Rings or something like that, this is very cool. Again, I don't want to spoil too much quite yet. I'm about to get into it, but you essentially see these three characters having like 1, 2, 3 very separate storylines for like the first 3/4 of the book. And like slowly but surely they kind of start to converge. I have yet to read the second one or the third one or the fourth one or the fifth one. But what I've been told is that The Way of Kings, once you get into the other ones, almost feels like a prequel to everything else. It's almost like this is book 0 and not book 1. Brandon Sanderson, and I can attest to this from reading Mistborn too, has a tendency to like pack the first half of his books with the most setup you could possibly have for a fucking story. He's very verbose. There's a lot of time spent establishing characters and their relationships to each other, magic systems, lore. This book is so long, and you get a lot of these sort of like interstitial chapters with like interludes for these characters who, I don't know, may or may not have some significance down the line. But you get these little vignettes into like other parts of this world too. So if you're going to get into this book, be patient is the thing I could say. I was definitely losing my patience a bit, like the first like 300, 400 pages. Which is crazy because if you're not someone who reads these like massive tomes all the time, and I'm not, frankly, like I don't usually read books that are this fucking lengthy. So in my mind, at like page 400, you're kind of starting to wrap things up, but like he's kind of just getting started at that point, to be honest. However, if you can be patient and get through all of the world building, get through all of the setup, you will get to a point in the book that his sort of fandom has deemed the Sanderlanche, which essentially, this is a point, and this happens in a lot of his books, where everything he set up finally starts to pay off, and you almost have this like avalanche of plot points finally coming into fruition, and concluding, and like the action picks up and all of that. So your mileage may vary. I wouldn't judge you if you couldn't make it through it, to be honest. And I'm not saying that from from the perspective of like, oh, it's not for everyone, it's only for people who are like really real readers. Like, that's not what I mean. I just mean that, like, if that's not the type of storytelling that you really enjoy, maybe it's not for you, and that's okay. And frankly, I had my doubts as to whether or not this was for me, but I stuck it through, and that Sanderlanche hits, and it's like, cool, this is what we're here for. This is what all of that buildup was leading to, and it is worth it, at least in my eyes. It's fucking sweaty in here. I'm sorry about that. Hard to have the AC on while I'm filming a video because of like the, you know what I mean? And I gotta wear the jacket. I gotta look cool on camera. So yeah, apologies. Anyway, okay, I'm going to just go straight into spoiler territory now, because as much as I want this video to be for people who are maybe thinking about reading the book, I also want a place where I can talk to people who have already read the book, and please leave some comments, because one thing I've definitely found out through reading this book and his other books and posting about it online is his fan base is really nice. Like, there's some fan bases for other books that are just so fucking annoying and mean and like gatekeeping, and I haven't found that to be the case with Brandon Sanderson fans. I think almost all of the people that I've seen who have like noticed that I'm just getting into his stuff have been like super welcoming and like, I don't know, kind of like excited that someone else is like, you know, stepped into their little world that they love. So yeah, shout out to Brandon Sanderson fans. You guys have been great so far. I guess I'm one of you now too, so that counts for something. But anyway, all right, let's get into the meat of it. All right, guys, Kaladin. I wasn't sold on him for a lot of the book. He's this like depressed fucking soldier character, and I saw some meme talking about the Kaladin chapters. Like, you ever see those memes where it's like, here's the book and then here's like the little sections of the book on the side, and it sort of gives like a brief like description of what this part of the book is. And I think probably like this much of the middle of The Way of Kings was just described as depression simulator. And as far as the Kaladin chapters goes, like, that's pretty accurate. I'm someone who, like, whenever I see that there's about to be a chapter or even like an episode of TV where we're flashing back to someone's childhood, I'm just like, I don't fucking care. Like, just tell me about what's happening right now. I don't need to learn about this person's like childhood trauma that has formed who they are. And frankly, I stand by that for the most part. It's just not that entertaining to me. However, Sanderson did a good job with it. We all now understand why Kaladin is so sad and where he comes from and all this. And it does make his sort of like transformation into who he becomes by the end of the book pretty satisfying. So I'll give him that. I've mentioned this in like a short video that I did a while ago, but Kaladin, like, no matter what description Sanderson has given him for like his his physical appearance rather, I still just imagine him as this like sad fucking emo boy, like anime character. And I don't know. It's just like every time a chapter would go back to Kaladin from Dalinar or Shallan, I was like, Jesus fucking Christ, more of this shit. More of this like slave soldier man who's just suffering for 800 pages. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking forward to Words of Radiance because I've heard that he's not necessarily the focal point of that one. And don't get me wrong, I like Dalinar now. I think by the time you get to the end of the book and you see him like wield his power and, you know, survive the storm and, you know, have his big fucking anime moment where he jumps over the chasm and starts fighting all the Parshendi, like, that's all well and cool. It just feels so much like a fucking anime. Like, it's just like, it's like a power fantasy thing. And I don't know. It's not my favorite part of the book. The parts of the book that I like much more, and I felt this way about Mistborn too, is like all of the world building stuff. Anytime we got a Shallan chapter or a Dalinar chapter, I was like so much happier. Like, I was much readier to just stay in that space for a while. And like, I understand like you do need the Kaladin chapters and I'm excited to see where it goes, but those parts fucking dragged for me a lot. I think part of it too is there's so many bridge crew members, and I just like, I don't know, it's a lot to keep track of, and it's a lot of just like sadness and despair and dead people and dead family members and betrayal and all this other stuff. And like, I don't know, like that could have been a book on its own, and I don't think I would have read that book. The other stuff that happens outside of Kaladin I really, really liked. So let's talk about that a little bit. I think I'll talk about Dalinar first, actually. I was going to talk about Shallan first, but I think we need to get to Dalinar before we talk about Shallan. So, Dalinar is a warrior. His brother is killed in the opening moments of the book. And he's kind of like an old, crusty kook of a guy. He's stuck in his ways. He's adhering to the words of an ancient book and relying on those words to sort of guide his morality and his actions and his style of leadership. And I think, like, if that was all he was, he'd be kind of a boring character in the same way that, like, Kaladin is some of the time. However, the fact that he is, you know, battling fantasy dementia and having these visions, and you're not sure if he's going crazy. Well, you're pretty sure he's not going crazy. Everyone else in the book seems to think he's going crazy, but like as a smart reader, you're like, clearly this is something, right? Once you get into his point of view when the storm comes and like he's having these visions, like that stuff's really cool. Like that's the stuff I care about. And I don't know, that's the stuff I liked in Mistborn too, like all the Szeth chapters where you're getting more of like the history and the lore of the world and like how the magic works and ancient prophecies and that kind of thing. Like that does it for me. I really like that stuff. Dalinar's kids, which are Renarin and Adolin, I think. I don't give a fuck about them, honestly. I know people like Adolin a lot. But I don't know. I imagine he has some more importance later, and I know his fans won't spoil it for me, but I know they'll do something along the lines of like, just wait and see. But he didn't really do it for me. Renarin is basically a background character and doesn't really matter that much. I think Dalinar's relationship with Sadeas is pretty compelling. You've got this guy who is like telegraphed pretty early in the book as kind of like a shady character and someone who he probably shouldn't trust, but like the visions are telling him to trust him. And Sadeas also has this like kind of influence over Elokar, who's the king who took over for Gavilar, I think is his name, Dalinar's brother. So I like all that stuff. Once you get later into the book and Dalinar is starting to have a renewed sense of faith in Sadeas, it's like, brother, that's not real. And then obviously like Sadeas betrays him, and that's sort of like the climax of the book is that giant kind of ongoing battle where Sadeas pulls out and Dalinar's left on his own, and then Kaladin jumps in. Oh my god. I liked all that stuff a lot. And also like I think, I don't know, I also really liked the moments between Dalinar and, oh god, what is her name? I'm totally blanking on her name. But Elokar's mom, basically. Why can't I remember her fucking name? Anyway, their dynamic is really cool because you get this other side of Dalinar who's kind of just like, don't look at me. Don't look at me. It's not right. Yeah, they have this kind of like flirty romantic relationship, and I think that's a lot of fun. It gets you like a different side of him, and she's just a great character. Like, she's really well written. She's smart. She has insights that are helpful for Dalinar. I'm excited to see where that goes, because by the time you get to the end of the book, like, they've sort of broken the barrier and are fully, like, in territory where they're going to be together, right? So I want to see where that goes. I'll talk more about the end in a bit, but let's get to Shallan. Shallan was for sure, like, by and large, my favorite part of the book. And I felt that way from the beginning, and it didn't really change by the time I got to the end of the book. I guess I don't really need to give too much of a plot synopsis, but, you know, Shallan goes to the city that she travels to go study under Yasna, and she's there under false pretenses, right? Like, she's trying to steal her Fabrial, so that way she can, like, soulcast her. That's what it is. She can steal it, take it back to her family, and they will be out of danger. That part's really cool. I really like all of the lore that you get with Shallan too, where she starts having her own visions, like with her drawings, and you see these like netherworld shape people that appear in her drawings, and she's all freaked out by it. And you also have her sort of studying all of these books alongside Yasna and learning more about like the Void Bringers and what happened to the Radiance, and like how sort of this whole world has come to the point that it's in currently. That stuff's all really cool. But besides that, Shallan is just like one of the only kind of like lighthearted characters in the entire book. Obviously, she's in a lot of trouble a lot of the time. She's very freaked out. But in the beginning of the book, she's so kind of like light and airy and witty and funny. And I really appreciated those parts of the book because everything else around it is like pretty fucking grim. I feel like that's something that like Mistborn didn't have at all. Like Mistborn was so fucking serious the whole way through, and it's so like the world's covered in ash and everything is dark and fucked up, and you know the Lord Ruler rules everything, and it's still great. It's still a great book. But I appreciate that with the Way of Kings, you have so many different characters going on. You really get a lot of variety in terms of like the mood and the dialogue and all this other stuff. So I should also say too, while I'm talking about Mistborn, that I think this book is much more well written than Mistborn. I know as far as like the Brando Sando lore goes, like he had the idea for Way of Kings, but he needed to like write Mistborn first so that way he could like practice to write the Way of Kings. Good on you, buddy. You did it. Mistborn's really cool. I really like the world, but like this feels just more well constructed and it's more ambitious. And obviously it ties to Mistborn in some way because it's all part of the Cosmere. But yeah, I really liked the writing in this a lot more than I liked the writing in Mistborn. But anyway, Shallan, very cool character. Oh, and you know who else I should talk about is Szeth. I wouldn't consider Szeth like a main POV character because he's really not in that much of the book, but he's so central to like everything that happens in the book. Like he's the first part of it, right? You know, Szeth son Vellano wore white on the day he was to kill a king. That TikTok audio that's been going around. He's a really interesting character. He reminds me a lot of the Khandra in Mistborn. How he's it's like kind of like a slave race of a person who's there just to do the bidding of his masters and all that. But clearly he has a soul. Like he has a part of him that really, actually not even a part of him. It kind of seems like his entire being fucking hates what he does for a living. The man really hates his job. Don't we all? But he sets off the whole thing, right? Like he kills Gavilar and sort of sets into motion, you know, Dalinar being interested in the Parshendi, and then the whole war on the Parshendi, and them sort of having these battle camps at the chasms. It also sort of like brings in Yasna and Shallan into this part of things. So yeah, Szeth is a very cool character. I think we get more of him in one of the other books is what I've gathered. So super excited to see where that goes. And I think this is as good a point as any to talk about the ending of the book. So you've got Kaladin, who by the end of the book has gone full Super Saiyan and, wrecked a bunch of Parshendi. He saves Dalinar's life. He brings freedom to his bridge crew, which has been his goal from like the very beginning, basically. And he's become this sort of like savior figure to a lot of people in the book. He's sort of fulfilling this honestly kind of underexplored prophecy. Like I'm sure we'll get more of that in the other books, but Dalinar has gone from, depression simulator to like Jesus simulator by the end of the book. Now that he's like fully overpowered as a character and is sort of, it's so crazy because he's so powerful, but he's still just learning how to use it. So I want to see where he goes with it. That'll be interesting. I like the fact that Dalinar has now brought him and his crew into like his like group of soldiers and team, basically, so they're no longer slaves. It was very satisfying to have those two worlds cross over, and now we get to kind of go forward with them. Dalinar finally like having some fucking balls by the end of the book and, resolving I don't know, kind of going his own way in terms of resolving things with Sadeas. Obviously, Sadeas is still in a position of power, but Dalinar, like, kind of does a really interesting move by giving up his, it's the fucking sword, shard blade. That's what it's called. He gives up his shard blade to kind of, like, in exchange for the bridge crew. I don't know, I really like Dalinar. I know he's kind of stodgy and a little bit of like the consummate like good guy with morals, but like I don't know, you need that in the world, right? Like you need people like him to make sure society keeps functioning. So I like where he ended up. That whole exchange between him and Elakar at the end of the book where he goes in and just like kicks him in the fucking chest and is like, listen, little boy. That was very cool. Yeah, I'm excited to see how him and Kaladin pair up and like what they're gonna do in the face of like all this political unrest that's come up and has been completely agitated by the end of the book. So excited to see what happens there. Shallan, I think, has me the most excited out of anyone in terms of like going forward. By the end of the book, you figure out that she has the ability to cross over into this like netherworld. I think it's called Shadesmar. Do I have that right? I should have written this shit down. I'm sorry. But she has this ability to like soul cast without a Fabrial, and she also has this ability to slip into this world where she sees these weird like geometric phantom creatures. And what is that world, guys? Is it sort of like the fifth dimension? Is it something that exists all around them? And I don't know. I want to see what purpose that has. So super excited there. Obviously, there is some conspiracy going around because you have that little like creepy fuckhead character who was trying to kill her and Yasna, I forget his name, the little priest guy. You come to find out that he's part of like this order of people who have machinations and are trying to kind of mess things up. Yeah, I think that's the part of the book that like has intrigued me the most, and I want to see where that goes. So very excited about that. And then you also figure out that like the king of the city that she's been, Carbranth, right? That she's been staying in is one of the bad guys. Or at least we think so, right? Because he has a bunch of blood boys in a basement somewhere. So yeah, I don't know. It's so crazy that we spent 1,300 pages just to fucking set up a bunch of stuff for the next book. But yeah, I don't know. I flew through the last like 250 pages of the book. I think I did that whole swath in like one day. So yeah, Brandon Sanderson knows what he's doing. I had my doubts at first, but I think he, both in his writing and then also just like kind of like the philosophy that's present in the book, is a lot more sort of complex and open-minded and asking a lot of questions that I just kind of had my doubts that he was capable of doing. But yeah, man, this is very cool. I'm glad I got into this. So overall impressions, I really liked it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I don't do that too often, and I'm someone who most of the time gravitates to stories that are kind of more internal and slow and sad, and like, it just like, for context, my favorite movie is Lost in Translation, so I like that kind of thing a lot of the time. However, this thing was just so ambitious and so all over the place and epic. Like, I don't like the word epic, but this thing is truly epic. Yeah, super glad I got into this. I'm excited for Words of Radiance. I've been told that I should read Warbreaker first, so I'm going to get into that one and then get into Words of Radiance. I'll say this again, but people who are fans of Brandon Sanderson and who have kind of like globbed onto my content in the past few months when I've been talking about this, you are so sweet. It's a very supportive community. It's a little culty, but like, as far as I can tell, not in a particularly problematic way. I think like the worst criticism I've seen of Brandon Sanderson fans is just that they really like Brandon Sanderson, and there's this like sense of enthusiasm with them that I think makes people a little like, you know, so I don't know, just like what you like, you know? So yeah, thanks for welcoming me. It's been very cool. I'm not going to go straight into those books. I have a few things I want to read before I get back into this, but I'm glad I finished this right around when Wind and Truth came out. Kate is super excited to get into Wind and Truth, but I think she's actually going to keep rereading the series before she gets into it. Yeah, what else? I'm reading the Dandelion Dynasty. I'm on book 3 right now. I think I'm going to try and finish that by the end of the year. Get into Warbreaker, get into Words of Radiance. If you look around me, you will notice that I have a lot of books that I need to get to. And I'm trying not to put a bunch of pressure on myself to like read more than I actually have to. But yeah, if you're someone who has like stuck around for my content because of Brandon Sanderson, thank you. But I also hope you'll stick around for other stuff that I'm reading too, because I'm someone who likes to digest all sorts of different stuff. Sometimes I talk about music, sometimes I talk about movies, I'll talk about weird Japanese fiction, I'll talk about short stories, I'll talk about Brandon Sanderson again, for sure. But much like I had an open mind with getting into this, I hope you have an open mind to get into the other things that I like too. So, yeah, I think that's about it. Thanks so much for watching. Means a lot. My channel got monetized recently, which is really fucking cool. Yeah, I don't want to get too wishy-washy about what this channel means to me, but yeah, having a good time. It's cool seeing the work pay off. So yeah, thanks for watching. It's almost the end of the year, so I hope you have a happy new year. Yeah, you're the best. So ta-ta for now. Bye-bye.